we all come at this discussion, conversation that we're going to do this morning from like different locations. So it's really interesting to hear actually where people are coming from a church perspective, coming from a community organisational perspective, coming from a council perspective, coming from a resident perspective. Like, it's really interesting coming from all of that. So I'm going to ask you to both acknowledge that, but also suspend your disbelief. So what's really easy is to come to this conversation with our own assumptions about our work, about what's important, about what our roles are. It's easy to come with those hats, and then that becomes the lens through which you see everything. And or you come kind of going, I know quite a lot about this, I know very little about it. There's no experts in the room, including me and Marcia. Okay, there genuinely isn't. This is about learning together. So if you suspend your disbelief, you will get much more out of the whole process. Is that all right? Does that make sense? Cool. So just to locate myself in this kind of locating thing that people were doing. So I'm Tim. Helena said earlier, like, how am I going to introduce you? And I was like, I don't really know, because I'm not attached to, I don't work for an organisation. So I work for myself. So for a long time, I ran a voluntary sector organisation. I worked with Gareth for quite a while, like as part of that. And that's part of the location for me. But I also intentionally moved into a community that's a kind of outer estate in Birmingham 18 years ago. So an area that is labelled as an area of disadvantage. And I moved there slightly messianically, thinking I could sort the place out. Not quite like that, and the thing I have learned along the way is that that community is beautiful and wonderful and has wonderful people in it, and wonderful things can happen, like in it. And so part of my location actually is as a resident, actually, of a community which has lots of other people attempt to do things to it. So that's part of my location and journey, as well as running a organisation that sought to be embedded in communities and to work in communities, in particular with young people. And part of my journey that we're going to kind of unpack a bit today has been an increasing unhappiness that young people's lives were, I've got my family, however functional or dysfunctional that feels, I've got school, I've got some friends, and I might go to like a youth club or scouts or an activity. And increasingly unhappy with what was missing. So what is missing in that story that lots of young people experience in their lives? What's the bit of life that they miss, do we think? If we approach this through a neighbourhood kind of lens.
It's a community.
Community, yeah. How do they get treated often in a community? How do people, what's the narrative around young people often in community life?
They don't want a man giving away their area.
Yeah, we don't want them, right? You're not welcome. You're not valued. You haven't got something to contribute. What we're going to do is we quite like either the police or the youth service or somebody or their parents to sort them out, look after them, keep them away from the rest of us until they become adults. And we kind of hope when they've become adults, they're in a better place for us to begin to include them again. And of course, that doesn't work, right? So part of my journey is kind of that sense of the bit that's missing is that community life. So started a journey in my own neighbourhood of what would it mean for teenagers to grow up in a community that actually welcomed and valued them, where actually they knew people in their neighbourhood and people in their neighbourhood cared for them, and that people in the neighbourhood saw that these young people had gifts and skills and things to share, and that young people could grow up with a sense of there are people in this community that I can learn from, that can look out for me, do you know what I mean, that can share skills with me and help enhance my life together. So that's my location, like in this conversation. So people are coming from different perspectives. I'm also part of a local church, and so thinking about what a church's engagement with a local neighbourhood looks like and what that means. And again, I've been part of churches where when we talk about engaging with a local community, it's so that we can rock people in on a Sunday morning that can sit in our pews and become part of our club. And That doesn't mean that church life isn't really life-enhancing. That's been my experience of church life. But it shouldn't really be the driver of what we do in terms of engaging with community. So again, I went on a bit of a journey with my own church of thinking about what does it really mean to be present in this community? Like, why are we here? Like, what's our connections and roles with that? So that's kind of my location in this thing. But one of the things when people think about this idea of asset-based community development, which is what we're talking about, who's heard of that term? People heard of it, some people not heard of it, right? So one of the things that people think is, it must be like a methodology. It must be a set of tools that if only I did these things, this would be the outcome, right? Because a lot of us are used to that in the way we do life. If we do this, this will be the outcome of it. That's how funding works, right? For those of you who've had to apply for funding, right? What do you do when you apply for funding? You tell them what the need is. You tell them what you're going to do about it. You tell them the difference that it's going to make. Boom, 10 grand or whatever the figure might be, right? That's the way that we think about it. So I'm going to disappoint you if you think that this morning is going to be about a set of tools or a methodology, because I want to argue that it's a way of thinking. And that's the starting point, is changing the way we think about communities. So asking ourselves a different question. So something important about contributing, right? Contributing and our well-being go together. So if we feel valued, if we feel we can do something, if we feel like we can make a difference, that's good for us, right? And so one of the questions that ABCD asks is, why then do we label people as people who can't do something and are in need of our help? Because the very thing that enables people to feel well is the act of contributing, not the act of receiving. Do you know what I mean? So a lot of this stuff is about what happens if professionals invade citizen space and do things to people. What does that do to people? We think we're helping, but actually what's happening is we're diminishing. What has professionalisation and institutionalisation done to people? What has it done? What has labelling done to people in terms of their thinking about their capacities? So if you're told that you can't do something and you need someone else to do it for you, can you think of times where that's happened to you? Happens at school, right? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. How does your life work out if you're told that fairly consistently? It becomes something that you own, right? I always talk about it. It goes from you to I. If you tell a kid that they're stupid, what will they recount to you after a period of time? They will recount it as an I statement. I am stupid. I can't do things. Okay? So if we make people feel that they can't do things, they will inhabit that thought as part of their story. It's very powerful in people. And then what happens is it inhabits whole communities. The only way anything changes around here is if we can persuade the council, if we can persuade the council to do something for us. Okay, because people have become ingrained in that way of thinking. And the other part was, I think you talked about, was what does that do to professionals? And this can be some professionals can find this quite threatening because it challenges their helper mode. Because most people, in my experience, are want to do the right thing. It's not like institutions and people in them are being deliberately unhelpful or malicious or anything like that. They genuinely want to help. But as soon as you say maybe you're standing in space that someone else needs to stand in, what is the issue? The issue is power and role and identity. So one of the things we talk about for those people who you inhabit this world is decentering but not devaluing. So decentering yourself from being the centre of everything and allowing local people to be and the community to be the centre of everything, but not devaluing your professionalism, your skills, the things that you can bring. When you say about people who've been made to feel they can't do anything and then that breeds something, it's the kind of questions that we ask. What is it you care about? What is it you're good at? What would you like to do? If you could do something with your neighbours, what would it be? It's a completely different question to how can I help you with your unemployment, or how can I help you with your drug addiction? And what it is, it's this idea of focusing on what's strong to fix what's wrong. So it's not about saying issues of crime or drugs, etc., don't exist. No, you can't deny those things. But what it is saying rather than that being a problem that we need to come in and fix, is to say what's in this community and what's in people that can enable that to be dealt with. The government has a loneliness czar, which I think is mad. Like someone whose job it is to fix loneliness. Who can fix loneliness? Communities fix loneliness, right? Not government strategies and government policies. So connections, we go back to connections. Does the treasure exist in a neighbourhood already? Do the gifts and the skills and the capacities and possibilities live in a community already? And my challenge is that what lots of people think is they think that those things don't exist because they can't see them. And so what is it you then need? You then need a professional or an outside agency or an expert to come and do the thing that you think you need. My question with that one is not refer him to somewhere that's going to teach him a computer class. Find someone in his neighbourhood and exchange their gifts and skills with each other. Because what will happen is not only will they exchange gifts and skills, they'll build friendships. That's the difference in this approach that we're talking about. That's why I say it's not a toolkit or a set of methods, it's a way of thinking. And it's a way of thinking that says communities are full of treasure. They're full of possibility. They're full of assets. People, places, etc. And that's the difference in the thinking. If you go away, like you can leave now if you want, because if you leave with nothing else, leave with this, it's a different way of seeing the world. It's approaching every conversation and every interaction with possibility, not with problems. The question is, how do we help communities become safer places? And the way we make communities become safer places is when people know each other. When you build bonds of trust. And so the answer isn't more and more safeguarding services. There are times when you need that, but the answer is to build communities where people know each other, look out for each other, care for each other, because then people can keep themselves safe. That's the answer to it. So do you see what I mean? Like, it's approaching the right question from a different place. And hopefully what will happen is the more you're connected to people, the more you know people, not that you don't pay attention to safeguarding, but it becomes less and less of a issue that you have to pay that level of attention to, because people know each other, people are connected to each other. So that's a really good thought about how do we when you're part of organisations or institutions, like how do we show up is one of the questions we ask. How do you want to show up with neighbours? How do you show up with local people? How do people experience you? Like, do people experience you as somebody who's a no person, who's here's the bureaucratic form that I'm about to pull out? Or do they experience you as someone who's an alongsider, who's an enabler, who's a cheerleader? Do you know what I mean? Who says, I really want to come alongside you to help you build the kind of life that you want to build. One of the things I think that institutions forget is institutions came out of associational life. What is associational life? It's where people come together to do something they care enough about to do something with others to change something. I go cycling with a community cycling club on a Saturday morning. That is associational life. One of my foster lads goes to Scouts. That's associational life. It's when we come together to do something that we can't do by ourselves. And institutions grew out of that. They grew out of a sense of, we can't just do this ourselves. We need to have some structure and process to be able to do something together. My take is that what institutions have done is forgotten where they came from. When we say people are public servants, we should mean that. We serve the public. So here's a little quote from a bit of a guru in this stuff, a guy called John McKnight. I knew from being a neighbourhood organiser that you could never change, and I put young people in brackets because I was doing this for youth workers at the time, change people or neighbourhoods with the basic proposition that what we need to do is fix them. What made for change was communities that believed they had the capacities, skills, abilities, and could create power when they came together in community. Right, excellent. So, one of the things you talk about in this kind of work is making the invisible visible. Making the invisible visible. Helping people see their own capacities, helping people see the assets in their community. The reason I asked you that question of can you think of when you did something with a neighbour was to get you on that track of thinking. Oh, hang on a minute. I remember when I just look in on my neighbour because of this. Do you know what I mean? Like helping people begin to go, hang on a minute, there is something we do here that we call community life. I've just not named it before. I've not seen it before. And I think that's also true for institutions. Like actually making the invisible visible. So the normal way in life that sequencing works is there is a need in this community, and what we need is the government, local or national, or quangos or institutions, to do something about the issue that we see. Oh, if we can't do that, do you know what we'll do? We'll commission a voluntary sector organisation to do it for us. And normally you don't get to the end bit, which is what can local people do. ABCD asks the reverse question. What is it that communities are already doing or can do without any help at all? Like in our community, we found a grandma who not only picked her own grandkids up from school, but because her neighbour did shift work, she would often pick her neighbour's kids up and take them home and look after them until her neighbour came back from work. Didn't need an organisation, didn't need a risk assessment. Do you know what I mean? Now she didn't see that as building community life. But once you helped her name it, you're like, actually, what if communities were full of this stuff? And her eyes light up and go, oh, okay, I'm doing something good here, right? We've been programmed to think that other people will do this for us. One of the things I think that people get programmed to do and challenges both the right and the left in terms of thinking politically is this. The right think that you should stand on your own 2 feet, the state should do very little, and you should pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Okay? Which is a very individualised way of thinking about it, right? The left think that the answer, often the left, sorry, and I'm on that side of politics, but the left often think the answer is more money, more bureaucracy, more institutions, more state-run things. ABCD challenges both of those things. It challenges the abandonment model of the right and the we know best model of the left. And that's why it's quite challenging for people to inhabit that. Do you know what I mean? To inhabit that space. One of the things that you could think about is what spaces do you inhabit? So we inhabit individual space, which is a kind of right of centre kind of thinking. You know, when people talk about like personal development and all that kind of stuff, right? That's the individual space, right? On the other hand, you've got professional space. The only way you can do something is if you inhabit our professional spaces. Martin and I were just talking about like tenants in council housing, how they engage with the council. And often what councils will do is they'll set up some kind of structure, which is professionalised structures for residents to be part of. What we're talking about is shared space. How do you create shared space for people? Do you know what I mean? Where we're doing this together. And so the thing I want to leave you with the break is this, that we either approach things from an asset-based approach or a deficit approach, such abundant or scarcity. That's the way we approach life. What happens if we approach it from an asset-based perspective? We start with what's strong. What's good here? What have we got going for us here? That's the question you can ask a local community and people. What gives us life here? What's good here? A deficit thinking starts with what's missing or broken. So you immediately get people into one conversation or another conversation. You either get people into a strong conversation, this is what's good here, or you get people into a this is what's broken here. And how people start is how people will finish. An asset-based approach says, what are the opportunities or possibilities here? What could we do? If you care enough about this, what's possible? A deficit approach says, what is it we need to fix? Tell me what we need to fix and I'll fix it. An asset-based approach thinks internally, thinks inside the neighbourhood, inside the community, inside people and their capacities. The example is an egg, right? If you take an egg and you approach it from the outside, what happens? What happens to the egg? Cracks. You break it, right? What happens if you approach an egg from the inside? What happens? Chick. It hatches. Okay? So if we approach from the inside out, we can birth something beautiful. If we do too from the outside, we often crush and squash and diminish and disempower. You can't escape that it challenges the whole way we often do things. But one of the things we talk about is going at the speed of trust. Going at the speed of trust. And that is a different timescale to often how institutions want to work. So I'm doing a piece of work at the moment around a £45 million regeneration programme. And what I keep saying to them frequently is, if you build houses and change the nature of this neighbourhood quicker than people are willing to come with you, you are breaking the bonds of trust. And you may think you're doing a good thing by providing better homes for people, but if you break the bounds of trust with people, people won't come with you on the journey. I think about it as a piece of elastic, okay? You can stretch a piece of elastic, but you cannot pull it hard enough that it breaks. So going at the speed of trust is important, and getting funders, organisations, institutions, professionals to think about going at the speed that it needs to go at, because this is slow, patient work. So in my community, we've been doing community building for 11 years, and we're still not there yet. I mean, in one sense, you never are, but do you know what I mean? We're not there yet. It is a slow process. And the people who want quick wins, and the people who want the money spent yesterday, and the people who want this being done, what's one of the worst things, actually, that like funders often do, is it gets to kind of January, February, and what do they start saying? Financial year's coming up and we've got an underspend. Can you spend it? It's lethal. I mean, it's good if you run an organisation, because suddenly, 10 grand you weren't expecting in your budget suddenly appears, right? But what does that make you do? Do something to people, go too fast. It's not something that people want to do. You do it to people because you haven't got enough time to take people with you, right? It happens all the time, right? So in my community, people remember the tower blocks being put up and people wanted to live in them. Gardens in the sky type thing, right? People lived in the back-to-backs and they wanted to go and live in the tower block, right? How did you get into a tower block? You were a good member of your own local community. You had to show that you lived in that community for a long period of time. You had to show that you were working. Do you know what I mean? You had to actually show that you were a contributing member of that community, right? And the lettings policy, right, validated that. What happened was they changed the law to make housing based on need. What happens if it's based on need? In Birmingham, I don't know if it's like in Sandwell, but you have a points-based system all about need. Nowhere on the points that you can get for housing is there, I'm contributing to my own local community. And so what happens is people get shifted out, shifted in. You should campaign on that. Because you can... Sorry, Marcia, I'm going to get you in trouble. Because a council can develop a local lettings policy. They can do it. And actually, if you've got a local lettings policy, suddenly all the things I'm describing then go back into the mix. Which is actually, if you need a bigger place or better accommodation or whatever, you should have first dibs on whatever's available in your own local community. So I would campaign for that. What people get used to is someone will parachute in, they'll promise the world, and they'll be there for the length of time that they've got the funding for, and then they'll leave. And people get cynical about that process because they think what it means is people do not care. To be honest, this is, I know people are coming from a lot of different contexts, but one of the great things about something like churches, for example, or mosques, I was talking to someone earlier, is that they are places that residence groups, they are people who are rooted in communities and aren't going somewhere. Someone like churches, if they do it well, do you know what I mean, can do an amazing amount with a small amount of financial resource because they're there for the long haul. So it is a real challenge, but avoiding that initiative-itis, project-itis fixing thing, do you know what I mean? Again, how can what we do help connect people, help build community, create something that's got some long-termism to it, is part of the answer to this. But I can't escape that those are some of the challenges. And you'll have to get your elbows out a bit, again, to the institutions and the organisations to say, let's just not get a big chunk of money for a year's project, go and do it to them, think that's going to sort everything, and then go again. You've got to resist that. Yeah. Turning down money is a thing, right? Who pays the piper, plays the tune, right? Money can be a bit lethal in communities because it makes people think that resources are scarce and we have to fight for them, rather than we've got abundance and we can share it. One of the things we talk about in asset-based community development is what is the means of exchange in a community? What is it you exchange? Money is only one of the means of exchange. What might be some other means of exchange? Experience, skills, resources you've already got. Yeah, all that stuff, right? What happens is if someone lands £1 million, which to a local resident who's barely getting by sounds like everything, is suddenly it makes the means of exchange only about that money, which is scarce, and we have to fight for. So money is important, don't get me wrong, money is a means of exchange in a local community, and one of the things actually that you should think about is how do we make money circulate in a community, how do we keep it within this community? In a low-income community, I think keeping money circulating as much as you can, do you know what I mean, is actually then a good means of using money as a means of exchange. Does that make sense? So you could do buy local schemes, you could think about social enterprises, you could, do you know what I mean? There's things you can think about that get that transaction happen differently. Think of the Olympic rings, right? That's the way to think about it, right? What a lot of people do, especially if they think there's only so much resource, is they want to appropriate everything within the one ring, which is empire building. Our residence group is the most important thing here. Our voluntary sector group is the most important thing here. If there's money going, you should pay us. All right? The Olympic rings is to say there are several circles in this community and they are joined together, but they are not one. That actually what you want is you want civic infrastructure in your community. You want a multiplicity of community life and opportunities, but the rings are linked together. So they all are part of the bigger picture. And that way you get people, I know it's hard to do the practical bit of this, right? Go get that right. But in principle, what you want people to do is to see that and to see it through the eyes of abundance. There is enough here. We have enough here. If only we connected and collaborated together, there is enough here. And it doesn't, one of the things that people do is they become possessors of people. These people are my clients. They're my customers. They're my beneficiaries. They belong to me. When actually what you should be doing is saying they are part of this community. They don't belong to me. None of us possess people. Possessing people is a completely wrong way to treat somebody. What people have is a multiplicity of connections into community life to get from community life the things that they need. And we should celebrate that. And we should tell stories about that. Do you know what I mean? We should create a narrative around our neighbourhood that says, look at what we have, which is why, make sure I don't run out of time, if not, we don't do it today, I'll send you on homework with it. Asset mapping really works, right? Because it starts saying, look at what we have. So that, I don't know if the analogy works in your head, but do you know what I mean? That Olympic ring thing is the way to think about it, rather than that appropriation by one group who go, there's a bit of money, so it should be us. Cool? Okay, so some good doubting questions, I think, from all that. Really, really good. Hopefully the kind of ways we talked about it, what you found helpful. So I think we alluded to this earlier, but the 2, 4 with by quadrants. So lots of what communities experience is things done to us or things done for us. And in essence, there are some things that you need done for you or to you. I quite like the council to collect my bins. Okay, I don't need to participate in the process of the bins. I just want someone to collect the bins. Right? But what we're talking about in community building is doing things with people, and what we'd love to see is things done by people. So a golden rule is never do something that isn't at least with people. If you obeyed that golden rule, a lot would happen. And so what we move from is the expert service provider to either a gapper, which is we stand in the gap. This is, my experience of good council officers actually is often good ones can be gappers, right? Because what they literally do is stand in the gap between the institution and local people. And they literally create the room for local people to do the things together that they want to do together. They find them the resources that they need. They find them the connections that they need, but they protect the space for people to be able to do things. So that idea about being a gapper is part of the with model. So when we think about how do we show up with people, it's to show up to be with people and to create the spaces for people to do the things together that they want to do together. And the by space, which is things done by people for people, is about being an alongsider. Let me cheer you on. Let me help you connect with other people. Do you know what I mean? Let me find you a bit of money that you need. But we're not going to take this over. We're not going to do this for you. My vicar, Al, he talks about literally standing in the post office, putting a nominations box out, and somebody said, he overheard 2 people talking to each other. What is that? What is an unsung hero? And he said to them, well, tell me somebody that you know who does something that nobody else recognises. Suddenly they were off. Oh, is that what you mean? Nomination goes in the box. We hold an event, we get the Lord Mayor there, we tell all these stories of these amazing people in our neighbourhood who are doing amazing things. And one of the things we say to people is, if there is something you would like to do with your neighbours, what would that be? Phil, who's quite a character in our community, he says, I'm a bit of a showman, I've always wanted to do a community theatre group. Now, what we could have done is go, oh, great, we'll set up a community theatre group and you can volunteer for us. That'd be great. That's a really good idea. What we said was, that's fantastic. Is there anything you need to get it going? I need a few people to join in. I liked all that kind of stuff. So I was one of the people who put my hand up. I was like, I'll join in with that. I need a little bit of money to buy some costumes. Great, we'll find you a little bit of money. This year, I think we are on our 9th pantomime, which is now one of the traditions and rituals in our communities. But you know what I mean? Just asking that simple question of being alongside somebody and saying, what is it you care enough about to take action on, has resulted in joy to probably 200 people every Christmas who come and watch those pantomimes, and the people who come every Tuesday night to rehearse. And one of the beautiful things is we had one lady, his daughter, Rose, who's in her late 60s, her daughter came up to us at one of the pantomimes and at the end and said, and it's all, I get emotional with these things, she said, you don't know what you've done for my mum. When Dad died, she had nobody. She was really lonely. She said, this theatre group has literally saved her life. Okay? And that happened because we asked a different question. What would you like to do in your neighbourhood with your neighbours? What is it you care enough about to take action on? So we host street parties. And what we do is we go and knock the doors of people in the streets around us, and we invite them to a street party. Not only do we invite them to a street party, we ask if they would like to contribute. And what we say is, we want to do a street party, but we've got no money. Because money is a difficult means of exchange, right? Because what that gets people into is thinking about a different means of exchange. What do people do? Oh, I could bring some food. I've got some games. I've got some cricket stumps. I've got a frisbee. See what I mean? You don't need a big resources budget because people have it. So we host these street parties in different bits of our community. Someone hosts, in that case, Rhea and I host, and we ask, connect with people and ask them if they'd like to come along, and we ask them what they'd like to contribute. Because it gets people in that mindset of, I can contribute. This isn't a consumer activity. Do you know what I mean? This is not something that's been put on for you, going back to the quadrant, right? We're going to do this with each other. So where are places where people can come in and feel loved, which is the word we often don't use, valued, cared for, the kettle's always on, right? It sounds simple, it's not rocket science, right? But it's really important, yeah. How do you create places where everybody is welcome? Because what you're trying to build is inclusive community. You're not trying to create cliques, all right? You're trying to build community. So providing places of welcome should be genuine, inclusive places of welcome, where it doesn't matter who you are, and you're not walking through the door because you've got a need, you're not walking through the door because you've got a label, you're walking through the door because you want a cup of tea. So that's what potentially your homework is, if you want homework, is I'll give you a copy of this, but it's to think about your community and think about mapping the assets of people, places, institutions, etc.